Welcome to today's guest webinar with Alison Coward on great workshops, great teams. I'll hand over to Alison shortly. Yeah, I hope you enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. I may have met some of you at Collaborate, but if not, then nice to meet you. And if I did meet you at Collaborate, then nice to see you again. This is going to be my talk that I did give at Collaborate, great workshops, great teams, with a few little new things slipped in there. So if you have seen the talk before, then there will be some more bits and pieces. But I should just get straight into it. Perhaps I should start off by talking about what I mean by great workshops, great teams. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that workshops can be more than a one-off event. When we think about workshops, we often think about the actual event itself and the exercises that we're going to run. But from what I've seen in the work that I do, particularly with teams, is that workshops are often just the first point of a team working together more collaboratively. And there's so much more potential to workshops that sometimes we miss if we just think about, how we're going to have some fun on the day. So I want to talk through that. And the way that I'm going to sort of explain that really is that there's three levels to workshops. There's the content that you create, so there's a specific purpose that you might run a workshop and the things that you need to get out of it. But actually, when you're running that workshop, then there's an environment that's created that really can continue on into the project, the rest of the project, and you can set up an environment in a workshop that helps a team to work better together. And then when you find you're running more workshops, then actually the skills that you develop and you learn that are transferable to the rest of the work that you do. And it translates or contributes to what I call a workshop culture, which is where we start to take some of the elements of what happens in a workshop and it starts to kind of embed itself in our wider team culture and changes the way that we work together. So I've got sort of a lot to go through, and I will talk about that in a second, but I just want to give a bit of an introduction to myself. My name's Alison Coward. I run a company called Bracket, and at Bracket I help teams, particularly people that work in creative teams, to work better together. But I didn't really start off like that. A lot of the work that I do now is running workshops, and I facilitate workshops for teams. I also teach people how to run workshops as well. But Bracket started off very, very differently. Actually, when I started Bracket, I had the idea to run an agency. And the whole idea of running this agency was to bring individual creative practitioners together, so sort of self-employed artists, designers, illustrators, marketing people, together into project teams to run innovation projects for clients. And I started to kick that off, started to get that going. I found that every time I brought a team together from my network, it made sense to me to actually get everyone together in a room and to kick off the project, because everyone was based in different locations, they were doing their own thing, and we needed to have a point at the beginning of the project where we got on the same page and we would brainstorm the project that we were working on together. And it kind of made sense to me that this would be a kind of brainstorm, as I was not one of the creative practitioners myself. It made sense to me that I would be the person that guided that process. And it turned out that what I was doing in these sessions were workshops, and I had no idea really that workshop facilitation was a thing. But people kept on saying to me, this is great, we've got really great results from this workshop, can you come and do this for us? And one thing led to another, and I started to do more workshop facilitation. That led me on to write this book, Effective Workshops, a pocket guide to effective workshops, which came out in 2015. And as I say now, alongside doing a lot of workshop facilitation, it is teaching people how to run workshops. So really for me, workshops weren't the end goal. Really my passion was around collaboration and getting people to work better together. And workshops were a vehicle to making that happen. So really, as I say, workshops weren't the end goal. It was really just a way that I saw made most sense in getting people the best out of everyone in the team, getting everyone contributing ideas, getting everyone working well collaboratively and productively together. So what I'm going to talk about today in this talk, Great Workshops, Great Teams, is I do want to give you some really practical tips for developing workshops that are going to have an impact. So as I say, you know, workshops have got much more potential than just what happens on the day. It's really about how the way that you run workshops can influence the rest of a project that you work on. So let's start off by talking about how you can create your workshops, set your workshops up to have impact right from the start. And of course, I'm going to give you some very practical workshop design and facilitation tips, really helping you to get started if you've never run a workshop before, or you're quite new to it, giving you some places where you can start and some tips for getting going and helping you to build your confidence. And then finally, I'm going to talk about what I mean around this workshop culture, and how you can use your experience of running workshops to influence the way that your team works together. That's what I mean by, you know, when you run great workshops, then that leads to a great team as well. So starting off with workshops with impact. Just to start off, this is not a talk where I'm going to go through lots of workshop exercises. You know, that's important. It is important. I'm going to give you a few resources of places where I tend to get my workshop exercises from as well. But really, you know, it's not just about choosing the right exercises. It's about how you create that workshop. So what's more important for me is how you know how to put the pieces together, how you set up your workshop, as I say, to have impact, how you understand what the purpose of the workshop is, and you make sure that you're going to achieve that outcome as well. So a few resources which I think are great. I always use these resources when I'm planning my workshops. Gamestorming, brilliant book and online resource which has loads and loads of different types of workshop exercises that you can run. Some are sort of very short, some can be full workshops in themselves, workshops that are about divergent thinking, exploring an idea, or then making decisions, converging on ideas. Gamestorming is a great resource. There's also the Hyper Islands Toolbox, lots and lots of workshop techniques on there as well, energizers, exercises if you're looking to build your team, if you're looking to generate ideas and innovate, and a relatively new resource called Session Lab, another great library of facilitation resources. So for me, you know, the problem isn't really that we've got a lack of knowledge about where to find workshop exercises, it's around how to put it together. And this is sort of one of my big principles, the fact that preparation is the key to a great workshop. Actually, you know, spending the time up front is where you do most of your work to making sure that your workshop has impact. Because a workshop is really 3 stages when you think about it. It's the preparation, it's the facilitation, what happens on the day, and the follow-up. 3 stages. We often definitely forget about the follow-up, but sometimes we don't spend enough time on the preparation. And actually, the preparation and the follow-up are the only 2 things that we have control over. The facilitation, you know, we don't know what's going to happen on the day, so all we can do is kind of prepare and hope and sort of create a workshop that will get us an outcome that we hope to achieve. And the way to do that is really to define the purpose. The way that I think about doing this is really thinking beyond the end of the workshop. So say, you know, not just thinking what are the exercises I'm going to run on the day, but thinking what is it I'm running this workshop for? Where do we need to get to? What is it that, what's the outcome that we need? And the reason we do this is because when you think about any kind of workshop that you're running, in the context of a project, you know, you might have a workshop at the beginning, you might have a workshop somewhere in the middle, you might have a workshop at the end, but that squiggly line in between is all the stuff that happens in between workshops. That's the work that we need to get done. And every workshop that we run needs to contribute to that little piece in the middle. So a workshop is always part of a larger project. There's always a bigger context to it. And in order to make that workshop effective, that's what we need to consider. We need to think, how is the content that we produce from this workshop going to help us progress the project forward, or help us get to the next stage, or help us get the content that we need to go off and do some more work, which will bring us to the next workshop. So there's always a bigger reason. Say workshop's not an end in itself, it's always a means to an end. So the way to start defining the purpose is to think about a few questions. Think about, you know, where are we with the project now, and where do we need to be? What's the gap in between that? And how is a workshop going to help us generate the content or the thinking or the outcomes that we need to move this project along? What are the main challenges that we need to address? I'm going to talk a bit about questions in a second, but what are all the questions that we need to ask of all of the participants, all the attendees in the workshop, to make sure again that we get the content that we need? And what specific outcomes or outputs do we need? So being really, really specific about what this workshop is going to produce, not just thinking, oh, we're going to go into this workshop and generate lots of ideas. Well, actually, what are you going to turn those ideas into? Is it going to be the start of a plan? Is it going to be further ideas that you then put in front of people to select from? Do you need to produce a prototype? So be really, really specific about what you're going to try and produce from this workshop. And one of the tips that I have around follow-up, because follow-up is one of the questions that I get quite a lot with the teams that I work with. How do you make sure that a workshop actually has impact beyond the day itself? One of the tips that I have is to plan your follow-up when you're actually planning your workshop. So say, think about what it is that you're going to produce as a result of this workshop, think about the format, but then actually even schedule in time that you're going to spend on writing up the notes and turning the content from the workshop into that as well. So as I say, it's kind of being very specific about what it is that you're going to produce from the workshop content. What does it look like? What kind of document are you going to produce, or artifact are you going to produce? And working towards that. Every exercise, every part of the workshop that you plan will have that piece of content in mind. Now, the second part of making sure that your workshop has impact and planning a workshop with purpose is questions. For me, I like to say that the questions are the main communication tool of a workshop facilitator, because you're going to be, on the actual day, you're going to be asking loads and loads of questions. You're not there as a facilitator to provide content or provide input or to discuss along with the participants. You're there to actually draw the content and the information out from the people in the room. And the way that you do that is through questions. So you're going to be asking loads and loads of questions in the workshop itself. But then actually before, when you're planning the workshop, you're going to be generating questions, because again, it's the questions that form the structure of your workshop, the questions that you need to answer that start to form the structure of your workshop. So I like to say one of these exercises is to do question storming. When you're sort of sitting there planning your workshop, just brainstorm all of the questions that you would like answered and asked during your workshop, and that's how you're going to start to plan your structure and prepare for it. I actually created this tool very, very recently. It just helped me to break down this process of what you do before the workshop, and you're thinking about the end in mind. So you just have a sheet of A4 and you divide it into 4 sections like this, or 3 sections, and then sort of the third section is divided into 2. And you just identify what the purpose of the workshop is, what you're doing the workshop for, what you need, where you need to get to. And the final output, what is it that you're producing as a result of this workshop? And then you want to brainstorm loads and loads of questions, so all the questions that you can think of. Be curious as a facilitator. What is it that you really, really want to find out from the people that are in the room? Brainstorm all of those questions, and this can be loads of questions depending on the workshop, the length of the workshop that you're running and what you want to get out of it. But this really helps me to break down, particularly for really massive workshops and when there's a lot to cover. So what I do is I brainstorm all of the questions, and even if there's lots of questions, what I'll start to do is then group questions into similar themes, because there will be some overlap between them. And once you've started to get those themes, and that's when you realise those are the structure, that's the structure of your workshop. So each theme might be a section in your workshop. So identify the purpose. What is it that you want to achieve? What is it that you're producing? What's the final output of your workshop? Brainstorm all of the questions that you can think of. Spend half an hour to an hour doing that, and then start to group your questions into similar themes, and you'll start to see the sections of your workshop emerging, and then you can start to put those into an order of how you're going to address them in the workshop, and that's the kind of outline of your workshop. And then you'll be ready to go on and start designing your exercises after that. But this idea of kind of thinking about the purpose and starting with the end in mind before you even get into designing the exercises is really key to making sure that you're going to cover everything that you need to in the workshop, and your workshop is going to have more impact beyond the end of the day itself. And then the third part around creating a workshop with the impact is thinking about the experience. And this is something that probably a lot of you are, quite versed with in the work that you do, because I can imagine that a lot of you work in the area of user experience. Well, with a workshop, what you're thinking about is, what is it that you want people to think, feel, and do by the end of the workshop? What is the journey that you're going to be taking them through? How do you want them to react or act at the end of the workshop? So you're really kind of putting yourselves in the shoes of the participants. You're not just thinking, this is a workshop that I'm running, this is what I need to get out of it. Actually, you're thinking about the people that are going to be in the room and how they feel about what they're participating in, what they're engaging in. And if there's an outcome there, you want them to feel more motivated, or you want them to feel engaged in the project, or you want them to feel more creative. Then you want to think about that. And this is sort of one of the key parts in making sure that the atmosphere and the environment and the energy from the workshop actually starts to translate into your team, into your team culture. So some of the things that I look for when I'm creating a workshop, when I'm thinking about the experience, creating the experience for the people in the room, is this idea of collaboration. A workshop is really just an intense collaborative experience. So you definitely, that's at the top of the list. You want people to be creative. You want people to come forward with their ideas and contribute their ideas and come up with new concepts. You want people to feel that they are getting a lot done in the workshop. There's productivity. It's worth them being together in that format rather than working individually. And they want to feel that they're actually moving forward. They're making progress as well. And then you want people to feel engaged. You want people to feel that they've been a part of it. They've had an active part in that workshop. And you want to, as a facilitator, you want them to get to the end goal in their own way. You're not very prescriptive about how they get there. So there needs to be an element of autonomy there. And when I think about this list of sort of the experience that I try to create for participants in the workshop, actually it just looks like a really good list of what good teamwork looks like as well. So these are all the things that you want to achieve when you're working with your team. You want team to input their ideas, you want to get the best out of everyone, you want to make progress. I want everyone to feel engaged. So again, connecting that idea of running workshops, the more you run workshops, the easier it gets to understand the skills that you need to encourage this kind of culture within your team as well. So on to some practical tips for workshop design and facilitation. I'm going to give you some really sort of practical tips for where you can start, but I just want to start off with a bit of a concept first. So when I started designing and facilitating workshops, as I said, I didn't really realise that that's what I was doing. But I've kind of thought about how did I progress to become more confident in my facilitation, and I kind of think about the way that you develop facilitation skills as an iceberg, really. At the top, you have this idea of what I call level one. And you want to focus, if you've never run a workshop before and you're quite daunted by the prospect of running a workshop, then all you want to focus on are the things that are the most visible to your attendees and your participants. And that comes down really to making it collaborative. The reason people are in a workshop format is because they understand that, it's good to bounce ideas off of people, it's good to be in a room and kind of generate ideas with others, and you can create that energy, that excitement, that engagement, and that's what you want to focus on if you're doing it for the first time. And the visible elements of sort of running workshops are things like timekeeping, making sure that it doesn't run over and you get everything done that you need to, making sure that there's notes, you take the notes and you make a good record of the conversation. And the things that people are really going to notice in a workshop are things like, did they have the opportunity to get involved into the conversation? Was there somebody dominating the conversation too much? Do they feel that they made progress? So those are the things that you want to focus on. And I'm going to give you some tips for that. So, as I say, when I started facilitating the workshops, I kind of started off with a really simple exercise, which, you know, enabled me to, well, I developed a lot of confidence in running this exercise. So it enabled me to feel less daunted by the fact of that, you know, there was lots of people in the room and I needed to make progress in the workshop. And I call it a brain dump. So essentially, with a brain dump, the way that it works is that you pick a question and you choose a really good question. So this is your role as a facilitator, you know, finding the right type of question that is really going to get people thinking. And then you ask people to download anything that they're thinking in response to that question, one idea per post-it note. And then you organise those post-it notes into themes. You can either do that yourself or you can get the attendees to do that together. And you arrange them into some kind of logical format. So it may be that you take each of those themes and you ask people to delve into those areas in more detail, or it could be that you're perhaps brainstorming around a project, what are all the things that we need to do. So that arrangement might be a timeline of the tasks that you need to do and the order in which you need to do them. But this is such a simple format, and you've probably seen it before, you've probably used it before, you've done it yourself when you're doing your brainstorming. Such a simple format, because the only thing that you really need to do is choose a really good question at the beginning, and then all of the rest of the work is kind of done for you by the participants themselves. This is a really great way of kind of introducing yourself to the idea of facilitation or workshop facilitation. All you have to do is choose that really good question. So then when you're sort of thinking about making it collaborative, there's lots of different elements of group dynamics that it's worth being aware of. You know, when you're thinking about making it collaborative, you're thinking, you know, how do I get people working together in the best way? What are the best formats for doing that? And we know, you know, probably from our own experience, that brainstorming really just doesn't work. You know, we get people in a room, or we sort of load everyone into a room, call a brainstorming session at the last minute, off the cuff, have a flip chart and say, right, shout ideas out at me. And it's really awkward because you're only going to get some people contributing to the discussion. Some people are too shy to contribute their ideas. The ideas that you get are mediocre. So it's worth thinking about some of the techniques and tips that you can employ to make brainstorming more effective. And I would say the first thing is just have a look at what the original rules of brainstorming are, because Alex Osborne, who was an ad man who developed the concept, I think in the 1960s, had a very specific process for how brainstorming should be run. I'm not going to go through them here, but you can find it on Google really easily. And it's all around like how to, you know, how people see the brainstorming process and how they develop ideas. But take a look at that. But a couple of tips that have come to light for me recently by someone called Lee Thompson. Lee Thompson wrote this book called Creative Conspiracy, The New Rules of Breakthrough Collaboration. And what she did was she started to debunk a lot of the myths that we had around creativity and group creativity. And she rewrote some of the rules for brainstorming because she knew that, you know, since it's been developed, actually it was becoming less effective in the way that people were using it. And one of the things that she found was that brainstorming becomes much more effective if you ask people to think individually first. So before launching into a group discussion about whatever it is that you need to address, actually give people a little bit of time to think on their own about how they're going to respond. And a really great way to do this is just to give everyone a stack of post-it notes and get them to, say, write down their thoughts, one idea per post-it note individually, and then get them to work in a group. I mean, this works for, you know, various reasons. Mainly, it's a really great way of making sure that introverts and extroverts have equal opportunities to speak. The difference between introverts and extroverts is that introverts, you know, they like to think before they speak. So it may seem that they're shy. It's not that they're shy, it's just that they get their energy from being by themselves. So what they like to do is they like to have some time to think through things before they actually speak up. Whereas extroverts are the opposite. Extroverts actually, in order to process their thinking, They like to have conversations with people. They get their energy from being around people. So what happens in a workshop environment, an unfacilitated or badly facilitated workshop environment, is that the extroverts are going to seem like they're dominating the conversation, and actually it's just the way that they think. And so what we need to do is we need to give time for introverts, almost like to catch up. Give them a little bit of space and time to think about what they're going to say, and then when you sort of launch into a group discussion, then they've got their ideas ready to discuss as well. So that's the first tip, getting people to think individually first before you launch into a group discussion. And then the other tip that Lee Thompson said is brainstorming in 15-minute cycles max. This is a really great way to start thinking about time boxing the activities that you run and how long you run them for in workshops. One of the things that she found was that if you ask people to brainstorm around a task, after 15 minutes, the quality and the quantity of the ideas start to decrease. So 15 minutes is a really good cut-off time for getting some sort of, really focused, intense discussion and brainstorming activities. So this is when you're thinking about planning your workshops. When you're thinking about the time you're giving to brainstorming activities, you want to look at these 15-minute cycles. Another thing that you want to think about when you're designing your workshops and you're focusing on your workshop design is this idea of avoiding groupthink. Groupthink is the enemy of creativity. We want to avoid it at all costs. And this is the reason why we collaborate, because we want to bring people together with different ideas and viewpoints. So what's the point in hoping that everyone's going to think the same? We need those ideas to bash up against each other and to create some conflict in order to create something new. Some of the things to look out for when we're thinking about groupthink, Cass Sunstein and Reed Hasty wrote a really great article in Harvard Business Review called Making Dumb Groups Smarter, and a couple of things that they say contribute to groupthink, which are things that we're going to see quite a lot in the workshops that we run, is if someone supports an idea early, and sometimes it's very difficult for people to move away from an idea that they've had quite early on. So again, you want to kind of create ways and methods in your workshops to ensure that people don't get stuck on their first ideas, when it's generating lots of different ideas first before you start to reduce them down into the ones that are perhaps the best ideas or the most popular ideas. The other factor that contributes to groupthink is if someone who's more senior in the room starts to support a particular idea. This is something that I see quite a lot in workshops, because there's going to be a mix of different levels of people within the room, and sometimes people are afraid to speak up or contradict their managers or a senior partner within the room. So again, what ways can you design into your workshop, what methods can you design into your workshop that almost prevents the leaders from speaking up first, or making sure that others are able to talk before a leader kind of contributes their own ideas? Another tip is to separate divergent and convergent thinking. This is something that, again, I see quite a lot within teams. Divergent thinking is all about generating lots of different possibilities, lots of different ideas, coming up with as many possibilities as possible. And convergent thinking is when you want to start kind of applying criteria to those ideas so you can select a few and make decisions. Now, it's very difficult to do both of those two types of thinking at the same time, because one is about opening up, thinking big, coming up with lots of different ideas. One is about actually criticising those ideas and coming up, say, with the best one. It's like a quantity over quality issue. So you can't really do those two types of thinking at the same time. So when you're designing your workshop, you want to make sure that the exercises that you create are either about divergent thinking or about convergent thinking, and you separate the two. It makes the discussion a lot more productive. You avoid these kind of discussion loops. And it can be really frustrating when those two types of thinking are mixed up as well. So separating ideation and convergence, in a sense. Another tip, my final tip, which is this introduction to running workshops, is about keeping it dynamic. This is one of the key differences between what I see as the key differences between a workshop and a meeting. A meeting I see as quite static, people sitting around a table, one person speaking at a time. Whereas a workshop, you can have people standing up, moving around, sticking things on walls, people doing things at the same time. I think workshops are meant to be messy. And they're meant to be involved, and you're meant to be using your hands. So keeping it dynamic, keeping people, getting up off their feet, working in different groups, using the walls, using different artifacts which are going to help them to generate ideas, is a really great way of sort of getting started with workshop facilitation. Okay, so we've looked at the top level, the most visible layer of the iceberg, which is making it collaborative. Just below the surface is what I call level 2, which is guiding the content. So again, people are going to be a little bit more aware of your presence here, or a little bit less aware of your presence, but you're going to be getting a little bit more involved in the conversation, not contributing content, but actually guiding the content. So things like asking questions, asking follow-up questions, asking clarifying questions to make sure that people are staying on track. You're going to be doing things like summarising what people say and paraphrasing, feeding back to them to make sure that you've understood what they've said, and also doing a lot of synthesis as well. So level 1, really visible, the stuff that people are really going to notice, the group dynamics, are you taking notes, timekeeping. Level 2, where you take a little bit more of a step back, but you're involved in the discussion, you're helping the participants to guide the content. And then level 3, which is what I almost call the invisible skills. Those are the ones that are kind of really deep down, the things, the elements that people really don't notice, but they make a massive amount of difference. So these are things like being empathetic to the participants, being a good listener, being able to deal with silence and kind of the uncomfortable moments, feeling the energy in the room. And those people skills are quite difficult to acquire straight off. These are the kinds of things that when you know that someone's been a good facilitator, you don't quite know what they've done, but these are the things that they're doing. I mean, these are the kinds of skills that develop with practice the more you run workshops and you facilitate workshops. So it's really hard to kind of say this is what you need to do, but there are 4 skills that I think are skills that you can practice on a daily basis, which will help to prepare you to become a better facilitator. The first one is asking good questions. So I've spoken a lot about questions, and questions being the main communication tool of the facilitator. We want to think about asking open-ended questions, questions that get people thinking, not yes and questions that require a yes or no answer, but questions that get people thinking differently and broadly. As a facilitator, one of the things that I love when I'm facilitating workshops is being able to ask stupid questions. Stupid questions that people might be afraid to ask because they don't want to look stupid in front of their colleagues, but you can really question people's assumptions and make sure that everybody in the room really understands by kind of being that conduit for looking like the idiot almost. But they're not stupid questions, of course, because they're things that help to move the project forward, but they can seem like stupid questions to the participants. And asking what if questions, what if this was, what if we were to, how might we? So thinking about how you develop your skills for asking good questions. And if you're going to ask lots of good questions, you're going to get lots of good responses. So you need to really be able to listen to those responses in a say empathetic way, really understand what the underlying messages are that participants are saying, start to identify some of the themes that are coming out, and perhaps within a group. Again, if you're getting lots of good responses back and you're able to listen to those, and there's going to be a point, because you've been really good at asking questions and you've been really good at making sure that everyone has a say and everyone can contribute, you're going to get lots of diverse opinions. So there's going to be a point in your workshop, or various points throughout your workshop, where it feels really messy. It feels like there's too much flying around. There's so many ideas, lots of divergent ideas. So as a facilitator, one of the things that you need to be really comfortable with is dealing with chaos, and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because there's going to be so many of those moments within workshops where it's almost there's just too much content, too much information. So then the next stage in the 4 skills of facilitation is, after you've sort of dealt with all that chaos, is being able to synthesize content. And this is one of the reasons that the role of the facilitator is so important, because the facilitator is able to take a step back from being involved in the discussion. They're not involved in the discussion at all, but actually start to see the connections between what people are discussing, and make the links and actually feed that back to the participants. So synthesis is one of the key skills, I'd say, of a facilitator. So I love this quote from Maria Popova, who is the founder of a great site called Brainpickings, which is on Twitter as Brainpicker. But she says, creativity, to create is to combine existing bits of insight, knowledge, ideas and memories into new material and new interpretations of the world, to connect the seemingly dissociated, to see patterns where others see chaos. And for me, this is one of the key roles of a facilitator, being able to make those connections, being able to help people make sense of all of their ideas and their knowledge and bring it together. So just very quickly, those skills again, 4 skills which you can practice every day. You don't need to do these in workshops. Asking good questions, listening, dealing with chaos, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and synthesizing content. So I just want to end up really with talking about what I call this idea of what I call workshop culture, and it's this concept of taking what you learn in workshops and the culture of a workshop and the environment and the energy and the atmosphere that's created into workshop into more of your sort of long-term team culture. And the first way, or the first principle for this is really not forgetting the follow-up. A workshop can be, you can prepare for a workshop, you can have a really great workshop on the day, but we've all sat in those workshops, we've generated lots of ideas, and then 2 weeks later we thought, well, what happened? We came up with so many great things, but nothing's happened. So remembering to do the follow-up and make sure that, remember that the actual day of the workshop is only one part of a 3-part process. The follow-up actually makes the workshop. That's where you make the impact. So don't forget the follow-up, and that's your first step to establishing a workshop culture. The idea of workshop culture is really summed up well for me in this At the End of Sprint, which is a book by Jake Knapp, who is previously of Google Ventures, and he created this process. You possibly have heard of this, 5-day process for solving big problems and testing new ideas, which is kind of a very structured process for a very structured workshop in a sense, but you get from sort of one idea through to all through the process of generating ideas, prototyping those ideas and testing those ideas as well. And one of the things he says at the book about sort of running more sprints is this: after your first sprint, you might notice a shift in the way your team works. You'll build confidence in one another's expertise and in your collective ability to make progress towards ambitious goals. And this really, for me, kind of sums up this idea of workshop culture. The more workshops that you run, first of all, you want to run effective workshops. The more effective workshops you run, you start to create an environment and a culture within your team where you start to trust each other more. Everyone is able to have a say. So everyone is able to be creative. The quality of those ideas are increased. And actually that has an impact on the way that you work together outside of workshops. Coming back to this slide of the experience that you want to create for people in the workshop, all of these things are the things that you start to achieve also within the workshop culture. These don't have to only take place within kind of a 1 hour or even 3 hour or full day workshop. These can be elements that you achieve within your sort of daily work. So how to get a workshop culture? One thing is around asking more questions. You want to kind of be more curious, be more inquisitive, sort of approach working with your team, as a facilitator. Try and draw out the knowledge and expertise of the people that you're working with. You can also start to introduce workshop techniques to your existing meetings. It doesn't always have to be a full day, half day, even 1 hour workshop. You can take a 10-minute exercise and run that within an existing meeting to change things up and actually to get really good results in a short amount of time. I've already introduced you to one of those techniques, the brain dump. You can run a brain dump type exercise in 10 minutes. All you have to do, choose a really good question, make sure you've got some post-it notes and some Sharpies and put them around the room. Give everyone a moment or two to think by themselves and write their ideas on post-it notes, and then start having fun by sort of arranging those post-it notes into themes. And this can be a really short exercise that can have a lot of impact within a short space of time. And then the other thing is about rotating the facilitator role. There doesn't need to be sort of one specific person that is always playing the facilitator. Actually, those skills that I mentioned to you, asking good questions, listening, dealing with chaos, synthesizing, those are all skills that are useful to us in all of the work that we do. And they're kind of skills that come under the role of the facilitator. So when you're thinking about becoming, increasing the number of workshops that you run within your team, and also starting to embed this idea of a workshop culture, and then start to rotate that role of the facilitator around, because it gives everyone an opportunity to practice a new type of leadership and start to understand the skills that you need to facilitate a team and get the best out of everyone on a team, and sort of bringing those diverse opinions together. So that's it on my workshop culture. I mean, I just want to leave you with two principles, really, is that when you're planning your workshops, put a lot of time into your preparation, probably more than you think, particularly when you're running workshops for the first time, because that's really where you are able to plan for making the most impact that you can. And obviously, when you're running workshops, you do have to be flexible on the day when you're facilitating. There are going to be things that happen that you're not expecting, and you need to be responsive to that. But the more you prepare, the easier it is to respond to those changes on the day. So preparation really is a key to a great workshop. And then facilitation, this idea of facilitation, the skills that you learn through running great workshops, is the key to a great team. So run great workshops, and that can lead you to running a great team. If you want to learn more about this, I'm going to be running a masterclass in collaboration with Nomensa next year on the 14th of March. And that's the URL, bracketcreative.co.uk/masterclass-Bristol-2018. If you are interested in booking, then I'm going to offer a very small discount on top of the early bird rate. There's an early bird rate and a full rate, but if you want to book and you've listened to this webinar, then you can get a small discount, and just email me and I'll send you the discount there. And otherwise, if you want to find out more stuff about me, more stuff about Bracket, I have some downloadable templates for workshops on my website and lots of blog posts about running effective workshops as well. Then you can find me on Twitter at Alison Coward. You can email me directly, or you can visit my website, bracketcreative.co.uk. And thanks very much for your attention today. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've found some useful tips there. I think we can go to some questions now, if there's any questions from the audience. You can type any questions into the chat box. I think that's the way to do it, isn't it? So there's a question from Chris. Hello, Chris. The webinar is being recorded, so yes, we can. I think if you ask your teammates to sign up to the webinar, then they'll get the recording afterwards. If you have any questions, we've got a few minutes, so feel free to type your questions into the chat box. Or if you're shy, you can email me and I'll respond that way. There's a question there from Andrew. Okay. Okay, so there's two questions actually. There's a question from Sarah. Hey Sarah. Hey Alison, what's your experience of managing someone in a workshop who's being really disruptive? Any tips? Yeah. So I usually this is not a cop-out answer, but usually when I'm planning workshops, I will plan that there's going to be someone disruptive in there, and when I'm designing my activities, I'll design them with the idea to try and reduce as much disruption as possible. But as I say, I know that's not always possible. You just don't know what's going to happen on the day. So someone who's being really disruptive and it's kind of, you know, sort of creating a bad atmosphere in the workshop, there's some phrases that I have. So if they're being disruptive in terms of taking up too much of the discussion space, one of the phrases that I have is, you know, what you're saying is really valuable, but because of time, we're going to have to move on. Nobody likes to be the person that is taking loads of time to do anything. Other than that, I would take them aside. I would approach them directly. So it might be in a really subtle way when the group is perhaps working on small group exercises, and I'll take that person aside and I'll approach them. And you know, in these situations, you have to be empathetic, because there's always a reason why someone's being disruptive. When you're facilitating a session, it can be quite frustrating because, you know, there's lots of people in the room that really want to play ball. But actually, there's a reason why someone's being disruptive. Is it because they feel threatened? Is it because they're afraid of something? Is it because they don't feel like they're being heard? Is it because they feel they've had the discussion over and over before? So the best approach, I would say, is to speak to them individually and try and find out what it is that's bothering them. Asking questions, again, not kind of saying, you know, you're being really disruptive here, can you just play ball? So, you know, I can see this isn't working for you. How can I help? What is it, you know, what would you like to do from here? How would this session be most useful for you? So those are the kinds of tips that I would provide on someone being disruptive. It does take a lot of patience. One of the key skills of a facilitator, being very, very patient. But I think that's the way to do it, sort of from a point of empathy. Another question from Andrew. So, hi Andrew, I heard you say before to have a plan on what the outcome looks like from a workshop, i.e. what the report might look like. Can you give more insight on that? Yeah, so, I mean, I can give you some, you know, as much as I can give information on this. I'll give you an example. When I'm working with a client, I've got a client now actually that I'm working with, and I'm facilitating a workshop for them, and I'll sit down and sort of really, as I say, a workshop for me is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. There's always a reason why people are running a workshop. So you want to ask the questions. What is it, you know, what have been the challenges that they faced so far? What is it why are they running this workshop? What do they want to achieve from it? And actually, what would be the most useful thing to them to move this project to the next stage? So it may be that a team has been working on a project and they're finding it hard to progress. It may be that this, you know, the outcome of this is not about generating ideas. Actually, we need to get together and figure out how we're going to work together. And from that, we might start to put together some kind of agreement or some guidelines for how we work together. It may be, I don't know, the start of a project plan. It may be that, you know, you're generating ideas with the view to select an idea to produce a prototype, which you're then going to start testing with users. So having an idea of what that outcome is will help you to plan the activities in your workshop to make sure that you reach that outcome. I hope that's being clear. So it may be, you know, there's so many different formats that you come up with. I've produced a deck for a client before because they wanted me to run a workshop where we pulled together all of their directors' ideas about, you know, what was the brand values of the company. And actually they were going to start to use that to go out and try to find supporters and more customers. So it made sense that it was going to be the output of that meeting or that workshop was going to be the start of a deck that they could then update themselves. So it can vary. It can vary very broadly. But if you in your head can have a tangible idea of what it is that you want to produce from the workshop, then it helps you to plan it. And again, you know, this stuff may change. you may take a different direction in the workshop, but once you've got sort of an idea of somewhere where you want to get to, then it makes it a lot easier to prepare and facilitate that workshop and guided discussion. That's a great question. Okay, so another question from Ian. How would you approach running workshops within an established team? For example, where you as a facilitator work day to day with the workshop attendees. Right, okay, so I'm wondering if there's two things in there, two sort of questions in there, and correct me if I'm wrong. One question is introducing the workshop format to a team where you want to kind of run more workshops with your team. Or the other one is perhaps where you feel like you need to be involved in the discussion because it's part of your team, because part of a project that you're working on. So for the first one, I would say that sort of running workshops within an established team, I like to start small. I don't like to say, right, okay, right, we need to run more workshops, let's do a whole one-day workshop. Because that's, you know, it can be quite exhausting. It's quite a big jump from not running workshops to all of a sudden running workshops. So you can do what I mentioned before, actually take an element out of an existing meeting and run it in a facilitated way where you introduce people to the format. You do something like a brain dump and you get results really quickly within 10 minutes. Then your team are going to say to you, well, actually, we should be doing this more frequently. If it's about the second question, which is around, you know, you facilitating a workshop whereby you're involved in the project, then I am quite wary of facilitating and participating at the same time. I feel like it's very, very difficult to do that for the reason that as a facilitator, you're meant to kind of really be objective. There's just too much to do. You're kind of keeping an eye on time, you're taking notes, you're keeping an eye on group dynamics, you're kind of managing people that might be disruptive, you might need to address conflict. It's very difficult to get involved in the discussion and be an effective facilitator at the same time. So I would say that if you need to be involved in the discussion, then maybe you can help, you can design the workshop, but get someone else to facilitate for you. So I hope that answers your question. I think there were two possibilities. One was, you know, introducing the workshop format to your team, which I would say start small, start with a 10-minute, 20-minute exercise, and or if you need to be involved in the discussion as well, then I would say get another facilitator in. Great. They were really great questions. Thank you very much. I hope that I answered all your questions. If I didn't, then please feel free to email me, tweet me, and grill me a bit more. But thank you all so much for listening. It's been great being here at Nomensa. I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope you found it useful, and at least there's one thing in there that you can actively take and start trying straight away. As I mentioned, I'm going to be back at Nomensa in March. Running a workshop, so take a look at the details there if you're interested. If you'd like to get a discount code, then just drop me a line, alison@bracketcreative.co.uk. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.